necessary.
Right.
We don't.
Right, I know.
So.
That's fine.
Learning. And Alyssa, if our interview walks up, they're going to have to wait because I'm going to need 2 to 3 minutes to wind up. So just. Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. I am thrilled that you're all joining us today. We will be broadcasting live to you from Orlando, Florida at CPAC 2022, and I'm thrilled to be surrounded by two great men. You folks probably know who they are. Andy Mangione, our Executive Vice President of AMAC Action. Andy, what a thrill to have you here.
My pleasure, Rebecca. Always look forward to being here on Broadcast Row at CPAC.
Lots of fun, lots of exciting interviews we've got lined up today. And of course, we've also got our very own Robert, also known as Bobby Charles. And for those of you who may have forgotten, Bobby Charles has got an amazing background, having served as former Assistant Secretary of State under Colin Powell and in two White Houses, the Reagan White House and George H.W. White House, a Bush White House. Bobby, thanks for being with us today. What a great pleasure to have you.
It is always exciting, and as Andy and you have both said, to be right here in the middle of CPAC with the President coming later this week is exciting.
Yeah, and you know, folks, Bobby has 10 years naval experience, and that is so, I think, wonderful that we can tap into your background and your experience. So many people, when they woke up this morning and they turned on their television set, they heard about what's happening in Ukraine. And so I think it's worth us taking a little bit of time today, and we'll be talking to so many of our guests about what this means for America, for you, for people like us right here in America that say, what does this mean? So we're going to turn to Bobby and have him sort of unpack that for us for a little bit. So Bobby, you know, we've known for weeks that we've been sort of, that Russia wasn't backing down, and they've made some pretty strong statements, and we've heard Biden saying that this was imminent, that he thought that this was going to occur. But I think a lot of us are still pretty shocked. Now, we know that Biden has made many, many blunders. Our listeners know that over the last year and a half since he's been in office, and our fear here at AMAC is that our president is weak. And when we've got weak leadership, we're emboldening countries like China and like Russia. I want to turn to you, unpack a little bit, explain to us, how did we get to where we are right now, and what does this mean for us here at home?
You make great points, Rebecca, and I'll just say that we are suffering the consequences right now of weak leadership. It was entirely predictable in some ways. You know, it became more predictable after Afghanistan's chaotic, really bungled withdrawal, where we left literally tens of thousands of our allies on the ground, those who'd worked with the American military and those who'd worked with the State Department. And what you're seeing right now is, you know, on the one hand, I would tell people, be very, very concerned, and on the other hand, I'd say, don't overdo the concern. And I say that this way. It is consequential in that world history is sometimes made in a moment, and you don't know how profound that moment was until you look backwards. So some people might say, boy, this looks a lot like 1938 when Hitler went into the Sudetenland and took Czechoslovakia by back, but we're not going to get too upset about it. Well, that was the green light for Nazi Germany. They said, from there we can go forward because there's weakness across the West, okay? That could be this kind of moment, and it could therefore be the beginning of something really dramatic. And for sure, this is going to be the biggest, as it's shaping up today, this will be the biggest conflict since 1945 on the European continent. So it's a big deal. You have 43 million people in this country, the country of Ukraine. They're now literally shelling Kiev, which is about 100 miles from the eastern border and about 50 miles from the northern border. So they're moving deep in, and they're obviously they're putting troops in the lower two provinces, the oblasts that give Russia kind of control of a warm water port in the Crimea. And of course, completely throw to the wind the idea that those are sovereign states of Ukraine, which is a legitimate government. But if you back up a couple of steps here, what you see here is that this is a non-NATO country. So for starters, we need to understand, though the direct impact could be profound. It could create a refugee crisis across Europe, 43 million people trying to get out of the country. You already have lines this morning moving, this morning, moving into Poland. Poland is looking to set up refugee camps. You have, and of course the way that they do that is they go north through Belarus. So if you can imagine just for a moment, you have in your lower left here, you've got Ukraine, you've got Russia over here, and above Ukraine and beside Russia, you have this little teeny country called Belarus. Now Belarus is very important because it's allied with Russia. So all these troops that went in from the north into Ukraine, they came across and went down through Belarus. On the edges of Belarus are Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, where there are American troops, where these are NATO countries. So this is where it gets very perilous. If Russia were to take the bit in their mouth and run crazy, right, and try to take Ukraine and then decide, gosh, there's not a whole lot of troop presence in these other places, that would get very, very edgy. Those are all the direct results right now, never mind oil going through 100 and people being very concerned about the future economic environment. The indirect result is what you pointed to a moment ago, and that is in some ways even more profound than this, and this is where it does potentially get very scary, and that is that if there's a perception by the Biden administration reaction and Western allies, if there's a perception that the sanctions given are just lip service, that it's really not a big deal, that, hey, we kind of let them get away with it, the way Germany got away with things in 1938, then you can wait and watch and see China's going to move on the Spratly Islands, or they're going to move on the Sakhalin Islands, or they're going to move on Taiwan. We know they've already moved on Hong Kong, and all the while, we have a pact that was announced just a week ago between China and Russia where they would like to redefine human rights so that China will say what Russia did was okay, and then Russia will say what China did was okay. And where are we? Where is the American administration?
That's right.
Would this have happened under Ronald Reagan?
Well, that's really where I just want to pause there real quick before I turn to Andy. And I do want to point out, I'm a big picture type person. Looking at the real big picture, we see these three countries. We see Russia, Iran, and China. And so when I see the big picture long game, I say, oh boy, how concerned should we be? And when we see Biden's weak leadership, we understand that we're arriving at a place today that we really shouldn't be, or maybe perhaps would not have been under different leadership.
Absolutely.
For example,
true.
We've got on day one, Biden decided to shut down our Keystone pipeline, declaring that this pipeline is bad for our environment, that it contributes towards global warming. He did not do that with the Nord Stream pipeline in Russia. He said, okay, go ahead, and he encouraged that. And when America is no longer energy independent, what does that mean? How does our loss of energy independence put us in a more difficult position and take certain tools that we may have had used to negotiate to keep us away from this impending doom?
How perceptive, and I'll tell you why this is such a perceptive question. Actually, energy is at the heart of a lot of what's happening right now. So energy independence, if anything, this should drive home to us how critical energy independence is. Why? Because Russia's a huge oil producer, part of OPEC, okay? We gave up the notion that we had control under Donald Trump. We had energy independence, and we had fracking, and we had pipelines moving, and we were using all those magical assets that we have that we call fossil fuels to power our cars to go forward. And those aren't going to go away. They're there, but we're not using them. Europe, at this exact moment, and I got this yesterday, Europe at this exact moment is currently 40% dependent on Russia for oil and 30%, I think, dependent for natural gas. What Russia can do at any given moment is turn all those off. So you say, how about NATO sanctions against Russia? How about some economic sanctions? Oh, we're waving, Biden's waving the flag. We're going to do economic sanctions, and they're going to join us. And so what happens when Russia then says in response, we're turning off your winter heat? Okay, that's a pretty heavy. So it's going to call for courage and unity right now. Frankly, the West is under fire. The notion of freedom, the notion of democracy, the notion of our Bill of Rights, the notion that human rights matter are all on one side, and China and Russia are sitting on the other. Right. And this is an epic battle. This is a titanic moment. We either fight or we don't.
And for people listening, and for AMAC members across the country, they understand how this will impact all of us. It impacts all of us in some way. Andy, you do so much work with AMAC membership across all 50 states, and you're hearing their pain when they go to the pump and they're paying $1 or $2 more per gallon than they were paying just a few short years ago. We see the price of gasoline soaring. Inflation is impacting American homes. Tell us, what are you hearing from our AMAC members, and what do you foresee in the, over the next, say, 6 to 12 months?
I think a lot more financial pain for our AMAC members, and we do touch our members on a daily basis. It's unique what we do at AMAC Action. We touch members of Congress, we touch state legislators, but we touch our members on a daily basis when we ask them to become more involved and become actually part of the AMAC Army as activists. And we're hearing from them that they're making tough choices. They're making tough choices whether they're going to buy more groceries or put gas in their tanks. They're telling us exactly how much high energy costs are impacting their quality of life. And so I would forecast a lot more economic pain as a result of of what happened this morning. And when you're talking about energy independence, our members were thrilled. We're thrilled at what President Trump did with regard to pipelines. America becoming a net exporter of natural gas. Wouldn't that be nice if that was the situation today? Because we would be in a position to help out our allies.
That's exactly right. And Andy, it's funny that you mentioned natural gas, because the LNG ports in Northern Europe, so in the Baltics in particular, were to be built out and would have been built out under Donald Trump. And it was a tough thing, because they were saying, we will be brave. Russia was going to try to punish them for that. But at this exact moment, Russia would not have had the leverage that they have over half of Europe right now. And and they have leverage over Germany. They have leverage over the vast majority of the continent. So this is also sort of an epic battle shaping up here from a military perspective too, because what they're really doing is Russia is pressuring NATO and the greater Western alliance, and is effectively saying, we not only will we not let Ukraine join you, but we're gonna kind of push the envelope here. We're gonna push you economically. We're gonna push you with 190,000 troops. I know, Mr. Biden, if I dare ask, don't you think 190,000 troops going full bore might be having an effect on your global climate business and your energy use? I mean, was that really worth shutting down our energy independence and making Europe dependent on Russia, so that now Russia is emboldened to go do these things? So, people forget that it's a giant chess game. It really is. And international relations, if you move one piece on the board, it's going to affect 3 or 4 or 5 other pieces, okay? But what I see is this administration is sort of letting Russia and China move all the pieces, and we're just backing away wherever they move. And that's no way to play the game of chess. That's not even a good checkers game.
I mean, it's unbelievable when you understand and recognize that Putin seems not to flinch at all when threatened with even heavier sanctions.
That's right.
We know that China is saying, go ahead, we've got you. We'll partner with you in some way. And we see that Iran as well. I mean, we've got this trifecta, these 3 nations that want a whole new world order. They really want to wipe out our values as we know it. So it will be a long fight. I believe this is not going to, nothing is going to happen real quick in the near
I would just
future.
add North Korea. North Korea has decided to launch. Now, under Donald Trump, I know they said his rhetoric was a little tough, but did you notice that Kim backed down real fast, right? As soon as Donald Trump's gone, as soon as Joe Biden and his sort of feckless vice president is up, North Korea seems completely re-empowered. So, you're right. I'm always reminded of history, and I'm also reminded of the basic philosophy that underlies our whole way of thinking, our Bill of Rights, the natural law idea. And part of it goes back to people like Edmund Burke, who, his famous line that I think was just so remarkable, and we're talking more than 200 years ago, but he said, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. Right. All it takes for evil countries to prevail is for those that lead from a position of virtue or a position of principle or a position of human rights to say, no, we're not going to engage, which is exactly what we did in Afghanistan. We ran away tail between our legs. That is not what the American people do. We do not do that.
What we did there in Afghanistan really gave...
administration did that.
Yeah, it set the precedent to say this is the way America is going to respond or not respond, and that was a big mistake. So. But speaking of taking action and doing things, that is what is so wonderful about AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. For people listening, you've got to tell friends and family to join, renew your membership if you haven't, because we've got things that you can do, simple things that you can do that make huge differences and big impacts. Andy, you'll be sharing with us the 2021 report. We'll be bringing to you sort of a breakdown. You've got the whole report right here. You folks listening will be thrilled to hear about all of the work that we're doing across all 50 states. We need more AMAC leaders. We need more delegates, volunteers, chapter leaders to work side by side with your neighbors and your fellow Americans so that we can win back and save America. That's we've got to come up with our 2022 slogan for AMAC.
Absolutely. When you pivot to the annual report, we just released it, and the level of engagement on behalf of AMAC members, and you have to understand, all the credit for all the legislative successes that we had goes to our membership.
Yes.
All we do at AMAC Action, if you look at it and you boil it down, we coordinate activity, and we look for opportunities. But our members do the heavy lifting.
Isn't it wonderful?
And we had
hundreds of members across each and every state.
We average about 55 to 6,000 AMAC members per congressional district, which is a voting block, and we mobilize them on a routine basis to make sure that the conservative voice is heard in Washington, which is one of the reasons Dan Weber founded AMAC. He felt that voice was underrepresented, and we're working very hard to make sure that voice is amplified.
And it's the reason, it's the reason why we do this show. The reason why we take our time to bring to you what's happening here at AMAC is we do need for you to get involved, but we also want to keep you updated and apprised on the issues and let you know where AMAC stands and how AMAC is fighting on behalf of all Americans. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Andy, and I think a lot of people don't recognize how active at the state level as well as at the federal level we are. So we have at the federal level, some people in charge that we need to stop bad things from happening. Right. But it would be interesting maybe to, I can't remember the exact numbers, but the level of engagement seemed huge this year.
Bobby, in 2021, 735,000 messages were sent by AMAC members to members of Congress, House and Senate, state legislators, and CMS, regulatory agency, with regard to a wide variety of topics, including election integrity. And Rebecca, when you mentioned our involvement on the state level, we found ourselves at the state level as a result of the 2020 election, because that's where the battle is being fought regarding election reform. Now they're trying to federalize elections, and and Congress, Democrats in Congress have not given up on that pursuit. However, states are fighting back, and they're sovereign, and they're fighting for their sovereignty to run their own elections. So we found ourselves advocating on the state level, and we were very successful in getting election reform not only passed, but signed into law in Arizona, in Kentucky, in Texas, and in Florida.
Let me ask you another question on that. 2021 was a very important year. Obviously, 2020 was a very important year. How important do you think it is that we hold the line and that AMAC hold the line in 2022? Everybody knows we have to go vote in November, but how important is it in the context of how a lot of people pushed against this state legislation in 2022? How important is AMAC's role?
I think that, activating the membership is hugely important. Now, we're going to take it a step further. Yes, it's important to vote. And yes, you should put 10 people in the car and drive them to the polls with you. But becoming a poll watcher, becoming an election worker, becoming an election commissioner, they're all called different things in states across the country. We're coordinating a nationwide effort right now to make sure our members get involved and actually physically take the time, go to the polls, work them, be the feet on the street and the eyes of the 2022 midterms on and the primaries, because primary season is happening right now.
So, you know, it's interesting. It reminds me of how important our Constitution is. And one of the battles that's afoot, of course, is this states' rights versus federal rights. And, you know, our founders all believed that there should be a very limited federal government. The only things that it should do were the things that the states and the locals and the families and the citizens couldn't do for themselves. And so I almost think that this is kind of a 10th Amendment year, in that the great battle, sort of an epic battle between the states being able to assert the right to do what people in those states want them to do versus federal consolidated socialist control. This might be a huge issue. Then, of course, the other big constitutional issue that's pending at the Supreme Court is Roe v. Wade, and that's a very big issue. I mean, the Supreme Court heard arguments on it, and I know, Rebecca, you have some pretty strong views about that.
We sure do, and that's backed by over 2 million AMAC members who believe so strongly in the sanctity of life, and that life begins at the moment of conception, and we believe in protecting life. And believe that those decisions ought to be in the hands of the state. We're against the federal funding of abortion.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. What's interesting is that we do take the work that AMAC Action is doing is really driven by AMAC members. What do I mean by that, Bobby? AMAC members tell us what's important to us is our elections. Are they free and fair? What's important to us is that we do not sit back and let our children be brainwashed in school through the teachings of critical race theory or CRT. They care deeply about these issues, and they care deeply about life.
Yes.
And so AMAC is focused on the issues that matter most to AMAC members. And for more information on what we stand for, you can check out our stance on all of the key issues at amac.us. Go ahead and look about AMAC. We've got a long list there, and be sure to tell people that we exist, because in today's day and age, belonging to a group like AMAC makes a difference.
You know,
20 years ago, there was no group like us.
That's exactly right. And you know, one of the things that comes to my mind is every iteration of the farming season, you have to plant new crops. And every iteration, the climate changes a little bit. AMAC grew up very foresightfully with Dan Weber's prescient thinking in anticipation of a potential erosion of these rights for all Americans. And when I say these rights, I'm thinking First Amendment right to free speech not being canceled, First Amendment right to freedom of worship not being told until the Supreme Court reversed it, that somehow the federal government could stop your right to go to church because of COVID, not being told that you couldn't travel, the Second Amendment rights to self-defense and defense of your family, the Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, due process, 14th, 10th, all these rights. And interestingly, AMAC has sort of evolved as really the leading conservative organization able to articulate the critical nature of those rights. But you think that's a fair summary?
I think that's beautiful. You said it very, very well said, and it is why it is so important and key. I'm so excited to get jumping in right here with our next interview coming up. Who do we have coming up?
We've got Kurt Schlichter. Kurt Schlichter is he's a friend of AMAC's. I mean that he's been on your podcast.
Yes.
He's been very gracious with his time. We talked to him on Broadcast Row last year. Syndicated columnist, an Army war veteran. I believe he retired as a captain. He's a practicing litigator in Southern California. He's never short of opinions, and we always love talking to him.
And he's got this wicked sense of humor. We love Kurt Schlichter, folks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back, broadcasting live from CPAC 2022. This is your podcast, Better for America, folks. We'll be right back with Kurt Schlichter.
Are we off?
We got to know when we're off, because I was sitting like this.
Right, exactly.
That was great,
I just
Bobby.
like to watch this.
I'm always ready.
Welcome back, folks. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. I'm joined today with Andy Mangione. Andy, great to be here with you live here in Orlando.
Always a pleasure to be on Broadcast Row, as I mentioned before, talking to great friends and meeting new ones.
Isn't this great? We're thrilled with our next guest right here. Take it away, Andy.
Kurt, thank you for joining us. Kurt Schlichter is a retired Army colonel. He is a lawyer, a litigator practicing in Southern California. You read him on Town Hall, where he is a senior columnist, syndicated, and just an all-around good guy. I do believe I saw some stand-up comedy in your bio.
There is
before.
stand-up comedy in the past. I am esoteric. I'm a multi-talented Renaissance man. Yeah, it's funny because I was a reserve officer, I was a colonel for part of my career and active in others, and people were like, how could you be a colonel and a stand-up comic? The America's military reserves draws from all parts of society. When we deployed to Kosovo, ironically with a Ukrainian battalion, I did a poll of what the guys did, and we had everything from farmers to teachers to many lawyers, stand-up comic, obviously, professional gambler. So I think my odd background is kind of representative of America, and especially Southern California.
Isn't that great? And your background, really, it's so important today, and we're happy to talk to you about this. We woke up this morning, turned on the news, and see an invasion in Ukraine. Can you sort of sum up, tell us what your thoughts are? Where are we at, and how does this impact everyday Americans today? What do we have to worry about in the future? What do you see is coming around the corner?
Well, it's a very grave situation. My own background, besides being a squadron commander as a cavalry officer, I was also in Ukraine 4 times to train with him, and as I said, I deployed one of the battalions in Multinational Brigade East in Kosovo was a Ukrainian-Polish battalion. So I have a little familiarity with this stuff. The Ukrainians are very tough people. Don't confuse them necessarily with Russians, although a number of Ukrainians are ethnic Russians. There's a lot going on there that we don't really understand. Suffice it to say, they don't necessarily like each other. What we saw last night was exactly what I would expect from this kind of attack. Cyber attacks, fires from artillery and aircraft on key defense nodes, including air defense systems. There's some rumors about paratrooper attacks at the airport, which I'm not sure I believe. If you know anything about World War II, you know about Operation Market Garden. That may be an airfield too far. But the idea with the mechanized forces that Putin's arranged is to smash very quickly through the Ukrainian formations. I expect the Ukrainian formations to disintegrate quickly, simply because they can't take that kind of punishment. I expect Putin is going to surround some of the major cities, but probably not go deep inland. And I think he's going to have a guerrilla war problem. What you have here is the dog that catches the car. Yeah, he can take Ukraine, but he's got to hold it. Remember, these are guys who fought Stalin for 10 years after World War II. 10 years to stamp out the guerrillas. There's lots of mountains, there's swamps, there's woods, there's urban areas. All through Ukraine, those are prime areas for guerrilla warfare. I think that's what we're going to see.
Okay, okay. Which I just hate to say, oh, okay, and then move on to the next topic. But you've got experience in Ukraine. You were training.
Yeah, they're very tough guys. They're very dedicated. They're often drunk. They are, and they're very patriotic.
Okay.
They don't think like Americans, but they're not going to give up. They're used to hardship.
Okay.
So I do expect. I think the conventional forces are going to collapse fairly quickly, simply because of the size of the attack.
Okay.
And the capabilities of the Russians. I do expect, if Putin stays in there, I expect guerrilla conflict to arise. As for the United States, what should we do? I think we need to stay out of it on the ground and in the air. I don't think we need to intervene militarily. I'm not sure what America's vital interest is. And I'm not minimizing that this is a bad thing.
Understood.
But I'm an American. What are Americans' concerns? And I wrote about that in Town Hall recently. Is that our number one concern? I'm very concerned with some things happening here at home, too. And leadership is about priorities. If your priority is what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, I question your priorities.
There's a lot going on here, and there's just a nice segue to look at what's going on domestically. You also wrote a lot about the Canadian convoy.
Yes.
And now we've got an American version of that heating up.
I'm very, very concerned about Canada slipping into what's essentially a dictatorship. And I don't use that word lightly. When he invokes the emergency powers, that's essentially a dictatorship in the classic Roman way. When the Romans had an emergency, they would pick, instead of picking two consuls and having votes in the Assembly and the Senate, they would pick a dictator. And he would be absolute for 6 months, then put his stuff down. The emergency powers are kind of like that in Canada. Is it justified for a bunch of guys parking their trucks and honking horns in Ottawa? Is it okay to get rid of due process, to take people's property and livelihood without any kind of judicial review? Is it okay to lock people up without bail on vague charges like mischief? This is a serious, serious issue, and it's happening right next door. Could it happen here? You look at the abuses of the January 6th defendants, and they are abuses. It's a procedural disgrace, and you have to see that the ruling class feels very threatened, particularly by these working class revolts, is doing everything it can to delegitimize them and stamp them out, and the hell with due process. And I think that is, right now, America's greatest threat.
And people ought to listen to, you can say that over and over again. I believe that. That is a true statement, that we ought to be concerned and recognize what it looks like when freedom is stripped away.
Yes.
And it can happen here in America. People think, no, that could never happen. But when we see a government that has become so intrusive and wanting to do things like take over our elections and do things that seem un-American, a federal takeover of our election, for example, this For the People's Voting Act bill, which we know was shut down. When we see our own government that wants to spend money on more social programs, all of this should concern Americans. When we hear about our government that wants to strip away certain gun rights, all of this should be concerning to us. And all we need to do is look at our neighbor over there in Canada and say, if it happens there, it can happen anywhere.
You couldn't be more right. Look, we are seeing and I like to use the term ruling class because they hate when I do that, but I think it really applies. There's a class of people who thinks that because they have certain credentials or they were born into certain families, they have a right to rule over everyone else.
That's right.
This is false. And what you are seeing is the regime media, whose job is to reinforce the narratives of said ruling class, is really getting into it. If you look at the media, you will see articles like, "Freedom is white supremacy."
Right.
Which I think it is really news to, for example, my Latinx wife, who with her family escaped from Cuba to come to freedom. Right. You are seeing people saying things like, "Your freedom, my safety is more important than your quote unquote freedom." No, it's not. Okay, rights are the most important thing. People have died for rights. Okay. Your quote unquote right to make me walk around with a gag around my face. Right. That is non-existent. It doesn't exist. My rights are literally more important than your life because they're more important than my life because I have no intention of living as a serf. And if I have to die on a pile of hot brass, well, everybody's got to go some way, and I'd rather go like a man.
Well said.
Kurt, talking about the convoy, talking about how you just described the dictatorship that's now occurring in Canada, do you think the Canadian truckers were effective?
I'm going to be the rare pundit who doesn't presume to know everything. I don't understand Canadian politics. I find it disgraceful that so many Canadians supported this kind of fascist nonsense. And again, I'm using the word fascist advisedly because this is a conglomeration between government power and corporations. When they call up banks and say, "You will do this," and the banks are, "Hey, okay," right. That is a real problem. Yeah. And the idea of a bunch of stormtroopers stomping women on walkers with horses, you look at something like that, and there are Canadians who say that is A-OK. We are all right with that. Well, I'm not all right with that, and it's up to Canadians to fix Canada. I'm concerned about here. Okay. I'm concerned about Americans here who think that rights are optional, that due process is something that you only give when it's not too much trouble, and free speech is fine as long as you agree with the regime narrative. None of that is so, and we can't tolerate any of it.
Go ahead, Rich. So now there is an American trucker convoy that's beginning. I think they left California within the last 24, 48 hours. They have no intention, at least they're stated, that they'll shut down to get close to the Capitol, but they're looking at clogging up the Beltway. Any thoughts on that and what these guys can expect to happen?
Well, look, I was informed by the people who are whining about the truckers now that protests should make people uncomfortable. Protests should be disruptive. That's fine to shut down freeways. I want to know what the rule is.
Yeah.
Wink, wink. The truth is there are no rules.
Yeah.
There's only power for these guys. So if you're looking to shame them through hypocrisy, don't bother. Pointing out hypocrisy is very useful for bringing up people who haven't been paying attention to politics, but now sense something is wrong and want to understand why. Those are people we need to talk to about hypocrisy. But among us who do this all the time, to me it's like, yeah, they're bad people. All they care about is their own power. Why would they be consistent?
Yeah.
Right.
The one message for sure that this has really taught all of us is it did send a message, I think, across the globe. What's happening in Canada. People are saying, wow, wait a minute. And you only need to see one person show a little bit of courage for other people to become very brave. And so I think that this is good thing for America that we're seeing people protest, that we're seeing people stand up for rights.
Well, what you're seeing is a kind of unusual protest for America, although it has happened several times. The Tea Party was an example, tax revolt, late 70s an example. The silent majority under President Nixon was another example. It's when normal Americans who don't want anything to do with politics normally, okay? They want to take their kids to a baseball game, they want to go to church, they want to do their job, they don't want to bother with it, but sometimes they are forced into it. It's like, you know, Michael Corleone, they pulling me back in. And the ruling class does not want people like that to have a voice. They want them to be silent and obedient, and it terrifies them, and it should, because they have a huge effect when they do. The silent majority, the tax revolt, even the Tea Party had enormous effects. I think this is going to have enormous effects. We are seeing it in the polling. And we're seeing very interesting polling. If you look back 20 years ago, the Democrats were telling themselves, you know, our Latinx voters, whatever the hell Latinx is, they are the future of the Democrat Party, as if they somehow had a monopoly on this set of ultra-patriotic, also ultra-traditional Americans, right? And, you know, the idea that they actually use the word Latinx indicates to me that they've never actually talked to someone who was of Latin heritage. They thought they had a monopoly on these folks. But the polling is now showing Hispanic Americans are evenly divided, Republican and Democrat. This is unprecedented. This has completely destroyed their plan for the emerging Democrat majority. And the reason is it was presumptuous. They presumed that they had a right to a vote of this group, that they didn't need to earn it. You know, what we are selling as conservatives, we're telling family, freedom, God, and country.
Amen.
Okay? These things sell themselves, and normal American people, and I mean normal in the sense that they don't live in New York, they aren't on the faculty of an Ivy League college, they are not some sort of weird TikTok star. Normal people respond to that, and we are earning their votes. We have to keep that up.
We do, and what we're seeing and what we're actually predicting is that this issue over critical race theory and parents across the country, Republican and Democrats alike, are standing up and saying, we have a say in our children's education. We think that this is going to be a huge issue in which conservatives, we're going to see more conservatives elected into office. Do you agree? Oh,
you couldn't be more right. I did an experiment with a normal voter. Normal Republican. Look, I'm a hardcore conservative. I sat down, I did my podcast with a normal Republican. Guy was Hispanic, high-paying professional job, graduate degrees, and I said, tell me what's important to you. I want to understand, because I need to, we lost a lot of your votes under Trump.
Yes.
Tell me about, well, you know, Trump's troubling. I thought he was undignified. I was very concerned about the example he set. And I'm not going to argue. I'm taking notes. I'm listening.
Right.
And I said, what about this? What about that? What about CRT? Like The Exorcist. I mean, 180. Suddenly, this guy, now he's angry. He's like, this is un-American. I won't tolerate it. This is the worst thing ever. And I'm like, holy cow. Now, this is a guy who probably would have said, well, well, this Jeb Bush seems like a sensible chap.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
not a Kurt guy.
Right.
Right.
But boy, Jekyll and Hyde with CRT. It is poisonous because Americans are decent people and they understand, okay, that judging people by characteristics like race and ethnicity and that sort of thing, it is un-American, it is un-Christian, and it is unacceptable, and we are unaccepting it.
And do not mess with Mama Bear or
Oh.
Papa
No,
Bear.
not at all.
Because when you do,
Oh.
we'll come find you. I have one more
Yeah,
question.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm just going to get to the book.
Please go ahead.
Oh, no, we have 5 minutes.
Yes.
And we'll be back. Tell us about the book.
We'll be back. The Fall and Rise of America is my new book from Regnery. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. We'll be back. The Fall and Rise of America. It is about the trouble we're in, about the risks that we're facing, including China, including I talk about national divorce. You hear that. I talk about what would a civil war look like. But it's optimistic. Because I'm optimistic, because I've been privileged to serve our country. I've been privileged to live overseas and see where other people have made their mistakes. And I come back here and look, we have problems. We have real problems. And we have real challenges of people who do not believe in freedom the way that we do. But I think what we have is so much stronger than what they have. They're selling decline, they're selling failure, they're selling serfdom. And I don't think Americans are buying. So The Fall and Rise of America will be back. Go get it on Amazon. I think you'll like it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kurt Schlichter. What an honor to have you with us. Thank you for
An
joining us.
honor?
It is.
Oh my gosh, your standards are very low.
And for
How about it's just a thing?
Nah, it's an honor. And also for serving our country all those years.
Oh, I was a
Thank you.
colonel. I didn't do anything. It's the young guys who did everything. I stood there with a coffee cup where Sergeant Major told me.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, folks. We'll be right back in just a few short moments with more interviews right here, streaming live from CPAC Orlando. Don't go anywhere, folks.